Hello and welcome to this edition of Sarpy Outlook, a program in which we seek to advance democratic ideals from an issues-based perspective. My name is Randy Prier. We're very fortunate to have as a returning guest to Sarpy Outlook John Kretzschmar, the Director of the William Brennan Institute for Labor Studies at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Welcome back to the program, John.
Thank you, Randy. It's a pleasure to be back.
Well, regular viewers may remember that John appeared in an earlier video that we did on the state of the labor movement in America. It was an excellent video. I thought you did very well. During preparation for that interview, John and I talked about a number of topics, but I was particularly interested in John's insights on the problems Democrats and the progressive movement in general has with political messaging. That is, the way that we try to promote our issues and debate with our political opponents. In fact, it has been one of my major frustrations that, and to a lot of others I'm sure, the way that conservatives seem to be able to distill issues into what I call bumper sticker phrases. And these get captured in the public perception and we don't seem to be able to adequately rebut them. Things like death taxes, takers versus makers, failed stimulus. They started calling that before the stimulus program had even started taking effect. You didn't build that during the last campaign, or perhaps the biggest of all currently, Obamacare, which has become a pejorative unto itself with the incumbent things like job-killing effects and death panels and that sort of thing. As I said, they seem to be particularly adept at shaping the public perception of these sorts of things, and we don't seem to be able to effectively rebut them. Indeed, they've even taken the proud name of liberal and turned it into a dirty word. And so I guess the first thing I'd like to ask you, John, is really what's going on here? How did things get this way?
Well, different people have different answers. I trace it back to the 1971 Lewis Powell memo called The Attack on the American Free Enterprise System. It's a memo he wrote to the education director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And the memo was basically saying we need to do something because the youth of America and those who are coming through the university and college system are coming out with a critical analysis of how the economy works. And the conservative mindset was such that you need to fix it now, because if you don't fix it now, in 20 or 30 years, conservative ideology is going to be even less popular than it was in 1971.
And so what sorts of things happened as a result of this Simon memo?
The memo basically said to the chamber, you need to get some conservative donors who are willing to do a number of things. They need to set up institutes, conservative institutes on colleges and universities. They need to fund conservative chairs in College of Business and schools of law. And most dramatically, they need to set up conservative think tanks that would attract the best and brightest minds in the conservative spectrum and find a way to have them formulate messages and get those messages before the public. We see institutes like, as a result of this, the Business Roundtable, the Heritage Foundation, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Committee, Accuracy in Academe, the Manhattan Institute, lots and lots of think tanks. Some might even argue that the Platt Institute is a child or grandchild of this Lewis Powell memo.
Okay. And this memo was in 1971, so in essence we're talking about over 40 years, of almost 40 years of effort on the behalf of the conservative movement to to set the public image in their way.
And what liberals, progressives tend to do is we also have think tanks, but our think tanks are narrow little silos. They are not ideological first and foremost. So we have the labor silo, the one I'm most familiar with. We have the affirmative action silo. We have the environmental silo. We are always talking about silos and trying to relate those policies to the general public without giving them a larger frame. Progressives do not have a great way of, they don't have a great way of explaining government and the legitimate role of government in a democratic society. Conservatives have their talking points. So,
and you've also talked about what you call the conservative echo chamber. What part does this play, and what are you talking about?
Well, minds can be wired and rewired through repetition. Neurons that fire together wire together. The more often they fire, the deeper and stronger the connections become. So literally, as you pointed out earlier, 40 years ago, the term liberal was a positive term. People were proud to be liberal. Lyndon Johnson, as a liberal, ran against Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater only got 39% of the popular vote. And yet today, because of constant repetition within this echo chamber, it's not just the think tanks, it's also AM talk radio, it is also Fox News. It is a brilliant, I think, tight, cohesive way of getting a message and repeating it and repeating it and repeating it in a way so that the first time you might have heard death tax substituted for estate tax, it sounded forced and weird. But the 100th time you heard it, not so much. And the right-wing echo chamber repeats certain phrases, certain memes over and over again, and they get brought up by the mainstream media. Jon Stewart, and it's a terrible situation when people are using Jon Stewart for news. But Jon Stewart, every once in a while on his show, will have cut after cut after cut after cut of conservative talking heads using the same phrase over and over and over again. That's what I'm talking about when I say echo chamber, conservative echo chamber.
And it's not just repeating the message over and over again, it's framing the message in a way that goes back to reinforce their general worldview.
Right.
How does that work,
Right.
John?
Well, message framing is a way to get time messages to beliefs that we all hold. Typically, progressives talk about issues and plans for fixing them. Conservatives talk about a worldview about how to make the society more fair, more just, more this, more that from their particular point of view. And every issue that they talk about fits within that larger frame. Messages. Framing of messages is much like what a painter does. A painter gets to decide what's in and out of a painting. It gets to decide what point of view you're going to be presented with. Anything that's inside the painting is considered important. Anything outside the painting is considered irrelevant and needs to be downplayed. Conservatives are very good at framing. Liberals, not so much. Progressives, not so much. And that's a shame, because if you don't frame yourself, somebody else is going to frame you. And for 40 years, progressives, liberals, Democrats have been framed in ways that has made them look like the other, not American. Conservatives have taken phrases like founding fathers and founding ideals and patriotism and wrapped themselves in those. And they've also said liberals are anything but patriotic. Liberal ideas are the antithesis of what our founding fathers are about. And liberals haven't done a very good job of saying that's bad sociology. We really need to start wrapping our ideas in the American flag.
Well, as a high school and college debater and now a Toastmaster, I certainly understand the power of language. So what I hear you saying is that the conservatives have understood how to set the terms of debate. If you can set the terms of the debate, you control the discussion, basically.
Absolutely.
And the conservatives, as from what you're saying, have learned how to set the terms of debate and then through repetition taken control of the discussion, if you will.
They have. They've done it very effectively. And I read somewhere where I think it was George Lakoff, who is a fellow who's written a number of books on messaging, said that the reason that liberals, progressives are crummy at this is we're the folks who are on going to law school. We're the folks who are becoming social workers. We're the folks who are political scientists. Whereas those who are conservatives are the folks who are going into business, and they understand messaging and marketing. You sell the sizzle, not the steak, sort of an idea. And we forget. I mean, Dr. Martin Luther King, in his 1963 speech at the March for Jobs and Freedom, his speech was referred to as the I Have a Dream speech, right? Right. He wrapped that speech in American values and Christian values. If it were given today by a liberal politician, it would be called the I Have a 10-point plan speech. It's not as powerful. It doesn't touch people's deep core values. And that's what we need to do. We need to find a way to wrap our idea about the legitimate role of government in the American flag. We are a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people. We are a nation that we pledge, every time we pledge allegiance, we say this is a nation with liberty and justice for all, not the elite. And so we've got to find a way to take that core founding message and use it to frame what we're about and what we think government should legitimately be doing.
As a matter of fact, it's interesting. Earlier today, I was listening to a program on NPR talking about Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And in fact, he was doing some of the very same sorts of things. Instead of posing as a triumphant moment after the key battle of Gettysburg, what he was saying was that instead of, well, we're going to free the slaves or excoriating the South, he was saying we're going to have a new birth of freedom. We're going to make sure that government of the people, by the people, for the people does not perish. He was setting a broader framework to try to bring people back to what the Civil War was all about from the Union point of view. And this apparently, from what you're saying, is what we as liberals have not been able to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Core values, values that are caught up in the story of the American Revolution. Everybody who's a potential voter has heard those stories when they were knee-high to a grasshopper to today. We need to find a way to take those values, those understandings, and use them to frame everything that a progressive wants to do. If we fail to do that, we do at our own peril, because the more often we repeat those messages, the deeper they become in the minds of the general public.
Well, considering these things and this background that we've talked about, and you've kind of indicated some of the directions that we need to move, what do we do as progressives now to start to turn things around and make our messaging more effective? And this is particularly important when we think of not just the national elections, but our elections right here in Nebraska for governor and for state legislators and people like this.
Again, there are a number of people who have written about how to do this. The one politician that most progressive cognitive scientists think does an excellent job is a fellow named Barack Obama.
Yeah, heard of him, yes.
He's talking about American values almost all the time. And if we could look at how he presents that larger frame and then slips policy into it. We tend to talk policy first and values second. That's exactly the wrong thing to do. Everybody's brain is wired in a way so that their core values act as filters. And those filters are used to say, is what I'm seeing, does it mesh with what I truly believe? How does it mesh with the way I think society should work? And we need to talk about those values first and our policy second. Unfortunately, we do it.
I think this is referring back to what you mentioned as the silo-based approach that we have to various different sorts of issue sets. this is where you and I talked about the Enlightenment mentality, or the truth shall set you free, that seems to be our liberal approach to many things. Tell me about that and how that is not effective.
Well, we are not like Mr. Spock on Star Trek.
Okay.
Our brains are not like dictionaries. When a word or a phrase or a picture or a smell enters into our brains instantaneously and below the level of our awareness start processing. Estimates are that 95% of our brain's activity, even when we're actively thinking about something, is happening below the level of our awareness. And so by using the public values, values of freedom and opportunity and safety and security and liberty and equality and fairness and justice, when we talk about those public values, values that all of us have heard a lot about, and we use them to frame whatever particular policy we're aiming at, we're in better shape because our brains process material that way. That we reach more people if we wrap ourselves in values and beliefs and principles that are as American as apple pie.
So we need to understand that values from our perspective are every bit as important, a bit of our approach to political issues as the conservatives, and they don't own the value situation. We have values of our own that we can promote.
And our values and theirs overlap. There are a lot of values that are, nobody's against freedom. Nobody's against opportunity. Nobody's against security. It is when those words actually become operationalized that we have concerns. So we believe in freedom and liberty. And yet our nation engaged in a revolution and removed the freedom and liberty of the English aristocracy to run what's going on over here. So the words by themselves are generally accepted. It's when the rubber meets the road, when we try and actually use them, that we need to be very aware of what we're doing. Let me give you an example of framing and how. When I was in probably first grade, I learned that Columbus discovered America. That's a frame, right? It wasn't until much later that I started reading, and from the point of view of the Native Americans, Columbus invaded America, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So depending upon your point of view, you can tell the story two entirely different ways. Our brains can't hold two different ideas at the same time. The one that gets repeated most often, the one that gets shouted from the mountaintop loudest, is the one that's going to dominate. So for 40 years, conservatives have been dominating and shouting. It is time for us to start talking about these public values and reclaiming them for liberals, progressives, and Democrats.
So in terms of freedom, opportunity, and security, which really kind of summarize our basic values, we can say things like, we cannot be truly free, have the greatest opportunity, or be secure if we can't get enough to eat, if we aren't adequately educated. We cannot be free if we cannot get adequate health care. How can you be free if you live under the threat of losing your livelihood or even your life because you get adequate health care?
Absolutely, and I would add another layer on that. I would go back to the Declaration of Independence and talk about inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And every one of those examples you just gave, those inalienable rights that belong to all of us, not just some of us, can't be fully accessed without the kind of programs that you were just talking about.
Well, John, we are running out of time, but before we go, I did want to give you an opportunity. You mentioned one writer, George Lakoff, who has been important in this area. What are some of the other sources that people might go and look for themselves to get a further insight on this whole idea of messaging and framing?
George Lakoff has written the most. He's the one I've read the most. He has a book called Thinking Points. He has a book called The Little Blue Book. He's got a book called Whose Freedom? All excellent reads that help progressives understand how the brain works and what how to value, how to frame our values. Drew Weston wrote a book called The Political Brain. Again, a great piece of work. And then there's a fellow named Bernie Horn who wrote a book. Let me see if I can get it here. I have it in front of me. Bernie Horn's book is called Framing the Future. All of them are great reads, and in terms of reclaiming patriotism, there are a couple books out there by Nick Hanauer and Eric Liu. One is called The True Patriot. The other one is called The Gardens of Democracy. All good reading. I recommend everybody who wants to try and influence the persuadables in the general public to read those, look at them, find a way to adapt them to their own personal speaking pattern.
Well, John, I want to thank you very much. This has been fascinating. We could go on and talk about this for a long time. But it has been a great pleasure to have once again as our guest John Kretzschmar from the William Brennan Institute for Labor Studies. My name is Randy Prier. Thank you and have a good day.